A lot of times when you talk to atheists, they start from the premise that personal experience has been established to be unreliable. But we rely on personal experience all the time. Like in courtrooms, the value of eyewitness testimony, that's the fundamental evidence. The jury can take it and believe it or not believe it, but the value of personal testimony, not hearsay, what someone else has told you has been their experience, but what you experienced yourself, the value of putting it forward is still considered primary. And we also rely on personal experience all the time. Like if you're going to do something like climb the Himalayas and you've never done it, you read about people who have done that before and they say, at whatever altitude I experienced this. You don't know, but you believe them. You take precautions or you prepare based on what they experience. And so it seems like the value of personal experience has not been proven to be unreliable. And then the second question is that it seems like something can be understood or it can't. And like Catholics start from the premise that the nature of reality can't be understood. And atheists seem to start from the premise that, reality is a process that could be understood. But if it could, why don't we understand any more than we did like 2,000 years ago? We have theory, the theory of the Big Bang, but when you look at what complexity theorists say, they say that there's still a lot of leaps that have to be made in thinking to make the concept work. And so if the nature of reality is understandable, why don't we understand more about it today than we did, say, 2,000 years ago?
Well, let's take that one at a time.
Two big questions, yeah.
Personal experience. Is it reliable?
Well, you have to realize it's not binary. It's not like all personal experience is reliable or no personal experience is reliable. It's not like you're choosing to, deny all experience or accept all experience. Personal experience has a certain probability of being reliable, and what you're looking at is when the particular claim the person is making is going to have an intrinsic prior probability. So if they're saying they aliens abducted them, or they're saying they saw a horde of demons attack them in their room or something like that, we know from past experience that usually turns out to be hallucinatory or not true. And so for a personal experience to overcome that, we need a lot more evidence than that. We need superbly good personal experience, or we need a lot of it from a lot of different sources, a lot of different witnesses, or we need physical evidence.
And you're talking about like standards of evidence that professional historians would take into account.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And this is what I do in the book. It's Bayesian reasoning, where you have to weigh the different possibilities. So certain kinds of testimonies are unreliable, or obviously unreliable, because they make improbable claims. And so for those claims to be upheld, you need more than just someone claiming it.
What about people who wrote Gospels after they say Jesus died, and they say, they witnessed it?
Yeah, none of the Gospels were written by anyone who says they foresaw any of the stuff they wrote down. In fact, they don't even tell us who they are or how they know anything that they haven't. They don't tell us their sources. They don't tell us their methods. And so when we look at the Gospels, we don't know where these people are getting their stories. They're not eyewitnesses themselves. They don't claim to know any eyewitnesses.
It's written as an eyewitness description.
It actually isn't.
It's like Jesus.
I highly recommend then you can do some more research on this. For example, the crucifixion account is almost entirely based on clips from the Psalms. They just took passages. The Gospels look a lot like mythology. We have a lot of examples of other religions that were coming up with documents that are written in the same kind of voice. And there were, in fact, about 40 different Gospels, and we know about 10 to 12 of them that we have mostly intact. And we know a lot of those have to be false, and yet they read a lot like the Gospels we have in the New Testament. So it was actually very common to fabricate narratives in the form that we see in the Gospels in the New Testament. So here's the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verse 24. It reads literally, "They part his garments among them, casting lots upon them." Now here's Psalm 22, verse 18. "They part my garments among them and cast lots upon them." Mark is writing in the third person. The Psalms are writing in the first person. They're using the exact word-for-word, exact same statement.
To get back to the point, more what I was really asking a question.
But it's third person. It's not first person. It says they part his garments among them.
I've watched a couple of your shows. People will call and they'll be like, my mom said she saw a demon in a room. And then a lot of times the first response is, well,
I would say I wasn't
experiences
there, I
have been
don't have your
established to be
experience, and I can't
unreliable.
tell whether that really happened or not. But
Yeah.
you said that this sort of thing goes on in courts, and I can guarantee you that if somebody came in as a witness in court and said, and then I saw a demon rise up out of the earth, it's really unlikely that the judge or jury would take that into account as a serious explanation for, let's say, a murder trial or embezzlement, where somebody said, suddenly this demon made all this money disappear from the company's account.
But the value of the experience for it to be judged by the fact finder, whether it's a jury or a judge, the value of the person saying it and then the listeners interpreting it is primary.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about eyewitness testimony being so reliable, and it's the ultimate, piece of evidence in our court system, and that's just not true at all. If you look at the reliability of eyewitness testimony, it is terrible. You put a room full of people and you show them something and then ask them what they saw, you'll get many different answers. And people have been convicted wrongly based on people who were sure this is who they saw, and they were wrong. And it's very, very easy to fool yourself, to think you saw something. If you don't remember clearly, your brain will just make up stuff to fill in the gaps. And we've demonstrated that thousands of times in different studies. So eyewitness testimony is actually really, really unreliable.
It's true what you're saying about, you put people in the room and then it's like, was the guy wearing a tie? And 3 of them say yes and 2 of them say no. But we still hold that as meaningful.
Well, we shouldn't.
Chris was just saying we don't.
I mean, we don't, and that would be a bad thing for everybody, so we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, you have to wait.
I don't know. I mean, I'm an attorney, and I've taken a really unconventional route. I took my studies extremely seriously, looking at the purpose of the system and the procedure that we've established. People from all different backgrounds coming together and deciding, like, this is what we're going to do. This has meaning and this is useful. Despite the errors, this is the most fair way we can assess what's going on, and we still have witnesses. We still take in witness accounts, and we still say all relevant witnesses can be replaced.
Witnesses can lie, witnesses can be deceived, witnesses can misreport badly. I mean, you must know this if you've been in courts. Certainly if you're a defense attorney, you must have actually used these arguments that I'm using myself in defense of your client.
Well, the thing is that sometimes that they are telling the truth. And
sometimes,
it's
probability.
The thing that's primary is for the witness to say what they're thinking, for the fact finder to be like, well, I think your mom was lying.
Yeah, but it certainly depends at least as much on the nature of the testimony as the content of the testimony itself. I mean, if if today you were to have somebody walk into court and say, I saw this guy die and 3 days later rise from the dead, or I saw a ghost show up in my house, that would be one of the least likely things that you were going to accept in court as relevant to the case, I would think.
Well, it depends on what the case was about, whether it would be relevant.
Really?
I don't think so, actually. Wow. Actually, by Supreme Court ruling, spectral evidence is not allowed.
Yeah, by 16th century ruling.
We don't know what's trying to be proved. I mean, it would depend on what kind of case it was. I mean, you're talking about a drug case where someone killed someone else, and they're saying what they experienced, and that's why they killed that person. And it's like, was it intentional? Was it not intentional?
Are they lying?
Relevance depends on what's being proved. So, I mean, to my second question, as far as whether things, everything either understandable or it's not.
I can answer that one, because this is right in my field.
But you, please go ahead. Do we understand more than we did 2,000 years ago?
My PhD's primary subject is history of science. So, and I studied ancient science. So I actually, a lot of what I've done, certainly in my dissertation, was compare what we knew scientifically about the world in the 1st and 2nd century AD with what we know about the world today. And it's mind-bogglingly, vastly more understanding today than we had. I mean, it's just bewildering how much more understanding we have today. So much so that what we've thoroughly established over the last, since the scientific revolution in the 17th century, in just the last few hundred years, we've thoroughly established that the scientific method is so incredibly effective that it can take our understanding of the world and multiply it millions and millions of times, I mean, which it has done so since 1600. So we know, if there's anything we know, is that science works exceedingly well. And the only thing that actually interferes with our advance, that slows it down perhaps, is technological access to the data. A lot of the things, like the questions we can't answer today, we only can't answer because we just don't have the particular machine that can see the thing that we want to look at. Or, in particular ways, for example, brain science. To really understand how the brain works, we would need a functional brain scanner that can scan the brain as it works down to the resolution of individual synaptic connections. We just haven't developed that technology yet, but within 50 or 60 years, we may have scanners that can do that. And that's just a technological obstacle.
So the thing that I'm wondering about, so like with that example you just gave, we know that it is understandable, but we're not there yet.
What Richard is saying is that we never have all the answers, and it certainly isn't going to ever be the case that we're done looking for stuff, because as humans, we like collecting more and more knowledge over time. But to say that because we haven't obtained an infinite amount of knowledge, we therefore have zero knowledge, or exactly the same knowledge as we did 100 years ago, when we lived maybe half as long on average, when we didn't have immediate access to everything that was going on around the globe through like electronic communications, when we didn't have as thorough a knowledge of human reproduction, for example, or people still believed that the sun goes around the earth, right? To say that we've accumulated all this knowledge and yet we know exactly the same amount as we did 2,000 years ago is just untrue.
But when it comes to God,
well, that's actually a really good point. With all the knowledge that we've been able to gain over all this time, we've learned nothing new about God. We've been trying as hard as we can, but to me that's an indication.
It may be that God exists, but it's not understandable. Like you can.
Well, yeah. Let me add to this. If it's not understandable, then Catholicism is false, right?
No, because that's the primary premise.
But if you can't understand God, then you can't actually have any true beliefs about God.
That doesn't make sense.
Well,
I mean,
if you have a true belief about God, you're claiming to understand something about God, and therefore God is not.
You don't have to understand something for it to exist.
For you to understand what it is that's true, yeah. If you're going to make any statement that has any meaning that's true about God, that means you understand something about God, and therefore God is understandable.
Well, then we go back to personal experience. Really, this question
we don't think is reliable.
Non sequitur there. But